Hello and welcome to Video Game Hangover. I'm Randy Dickinson, and I'm in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Hello, I am DJ Ross. I am in Mountain View, California.
On every episode of Video Game Hangover, we talk about the games that have been keeping us up at night. On this week's show, that list includes Monster Hunter Wilds, Wanderstop, and Death to the Reprobate. Death of the Reprobate.
Death to the Reprobate.
Yep.
That's what I always say.
Whole different tone, if you go that way.
Yeah. Which one is it?
It is Death of the Reprobate.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll talk about the other game next week.
Yes, this is the inevitable sequel.
That would be a good sequel naming scheme. Just use a different preposition every time.
Yep. That would be sort of on brand for this series of games, so that would make I would not be surprised. I should copyright that URL right now.
Yeah. Squat on it, and then when he goes to make the sequel, he's like, who would possibly register this?
What the hell is Video Game Hangover?
Degenerate. Yeah. That's so good.
But yeah, we'll get to that. That is a game that I played, and I will talk about it.
Nice.
Yeah. How's things? How's life? How you doing?
Oh, how am I doing? I'm so tired. I'm so tired of Final Fantasy XIV. Specifically, the Final Fantasy XIV community. I just can't deal with it anymore. I don't know. I still love the game, but it has not been a good year for the game. If you've been following along it, which I'm sure you have. It's been
of course.
The last expansion kind of had very mixed reception, and ever since that, it's just been like this doom spiral of people like, oh, the game is all just going downhill and it'll never be as good as it used to be. And it's gotten to the point where just any news that comes out about the game is just met with automatic negativity. I don't know if you've ever been into like a fandom or something like this where it's gotten to this point, but it's just like a self-perpetuating sort of death spiral where like everybody's so used to being negative, they just expect to be negative or all the news to be negative, so they can't help themselves. And it's making me insane because I'm just like, I feel like I'm just mired in it. As much as I try and be optimistic, because like I also just feel like some of these people need to go play other games instead. They really don't seem to be enjoying this anymore, so why would you just like cling to it so much?
Yeah. Yes. Well, that was my question for you. Do you feel that sort of influences your receiving of Final Fantasy XIV news, or are you able to sort of filter through that?
It's kind of been a struggle at points, and like I'm very aware that this is going on, and I have to remind myself, like, this is probably a fairly vocal minority,
right?
Because like when I actually log in and play the game, everybody on there seems to be having a great time. Like they're still running dungeons and all that stuff.
Sure.
They're not just like complaining about stuff. I guess that's like, you don't have anything left to do in the game. All there is left to do is go on Reddit and complain to people. So you never know if you never logged into those sites, which has sort of gotten me thinking like, I really need to spend less time on internet forums. Maybe that's the solution.
Yeah, maybe Reddit is the problem.
Yeah. It's
what's
depressing.
The sort of the stat is that like, I don't know, 10% of a community will engage, but only 1% is sort of like the most active, like posting every day and has strong opinions. And so it really is kind of that noisy 1% that sometimes dictates the direction and the tone of a community. And that seems really dangerous.
Yeah, it's not great, especially when it's like Reddit is such a hive mind where like even if you try and be positive about something, there are so many people in there who are just like so bought into the negativity they'll like vote it down, and
right?
Just like put it in the ground. Just like, oh no, let's get back to complaining about stuff. We can't have anybody who appears to actually be enjoying stuff.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, but I'm just like, I feel like frustrated and kind of sad for these people because there's like a huge update to the game coming out next week there's like, it has a lot of the features that people have been asking for a long time. It's always, in general, it's very exciting when one of these updates comes out. And still people are just like, well, it's not, I don't know what they're expecting. They're expecting it to just be like the patch that saves the game forever. It's like, no, I think at some point there's just no pleasing certain subsets of the community.
Right.
Like, it'll just never be enough for them.
Yeah.
That's why I advocate that all these people go and find a hobby that they actually enjoy spending time with. And this is coming from me, who plays an unreasonable amount of this game. I am still just like, there's nothing to do in the game at the moment. I will distract myself with other things and not just fixate on the fact that there's nothing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Make your own fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know you had told me that you had set up or joined like a raid group earlier in the year, and that dissolved pretty quickly. That you there was some night during the week that you were tied up, and then you were not tied up that night anymore, and you're like, oh no, that already fell apart.
I had like 2 weeks where I was committed to do another Ultimate raid, and due to other circumstances, people decided they didn't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Which was like, might as well do something else, I guess.
But when you started this conversation, I assumed that you were going down the path of that being the source of your frustration, but it does seem like there's a much bigger kind of cultural issue here.
Oh, not at all. I think that raid group situation was a whole other thing. It was completely separated. But yeah, I'm just like, it's been a tough year to be a Final Fantasy XIV fan. Whether you're optimistic about the game or whether you're one of those people who are just like, they'll never be able to make you happy ever again. It's just like, I'm still in there with all the rest of those people.
That's interesting. I mean, from your to go back to your original statement, I have never participated in a negative culture at all. So everything that I love is just universally adored and is super positive all the time.
Well, that sounds amazing.
Yeah. So I don't know where you found this weird little corner of the internet, DJ, but everything else is great in the world right now.
No. Well, so the thing is, there's like, you go on Reddit and there's the 14 subreddit. And then there's this other subreddit that is like, it started as like the discussion subreddit, and it was targeted more towards people who like wanted to get really into like theory crafting and the gameplay mechanics and everything. So skews a little more towards like the harder core player. And I think those people, they're just, in general, they're like much more invested in specific aspects of the game, like the hardcore, like high-end content and all that stuff. And the game has just gotten like, it's changed quite a bit since it launched over 10 years ago, and a lot of the changes have not been received favorably by that section of the community. So I think a lot of it is just like those people are just, they've been unsatisfied with the direction the game has been going in for quite some time, and realistically it's never going to go back to the way it was before, and I think they just need to come to terms with that.
Find another game. There's got to be another game that will push that button for you. So
yeah, well, the thing is, there's like not really. There's not a lot of other games out there that are like Final Fantasy XIV 6 or 7 years ago, which is a shame.
Yeah,
and it's also a shame because that's like one of the only places where one of the few communities where there are a lot of people who are really invested in the more like mechanical aspects of the game, and that they're not just posting fan art and stuff like that, which is great. Right. But sometimes I want to see somebody actually talking about like the jobs they like playing and stuff like that. It's just that it turns out all those people are also just intensely down on the game, and they have been for many years.
Yeah, this was kind of interesting. Like I get a lot of input about people who sort of feel a particular way about a band. And they're like, they're not as good as they used to be. The music's not as good. That last CD was really not great. The one that they did 15 years ago, 20 years ago was much, much better. I don't know why they don't make music like that anymore. And my perspective on that kind of, and that's pretty common, I think, in any music or band fandom.
I think so. That seems like a pretty typical sort of arc.
Right. Yeah. For a band that has any kind of longevity, obviously. So my perspective on that is, and this, I don't think this is unique to me, but is like those albums still exist. You can still go back and listen to those records if you wanted to, or you could dial them up on Spotify and listen to that particular thing from, 1994 that made you so happy. And it should theoretically still make you happy. Like I sort of respect the artist's perspective that they want to kind of grow and try new things and do other stuff and et cetera, et cetera. And I think it would be super boring if a band just made the same record over and over and over again. But there does seem to be a very loud percentage of a band's fan base that wants exactly that. And I think it's easy to sort of rewind to that place and still have access to that music and play that music and still hopefully get the feeling from that. But like for a video game that is constantly being updated, I don't know that there is a way necessarily to sort of rewind to that point. If Final Fantasy 6 or 7 years ago was what made you happiest, I don't know that there's a way to play that particular version of the game. Is there?
Yeah, there's not really. And that's a struggle with all live service games, I suppose. Right. Unless you're World of Warcraft and you just roll out World of Warcraft Classic or whatever. But yeah.
Yeah. You can't just buy the box version of it and put it in your device and never update it, never patch it, just play what came on the cartridge, right?
That would be cool if you could do that, but I haven't figured that out yet. What was the other game? Oh, Fortnite has like a classic mode or something that I haven't really... I mean, I wouldn't appreciate it anyway because I didn't play Fortnite enough back when it was relevant.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, so there's a precedent for some games doing that. It's just, I think they've actually said, like the 14 team has said that's not something they're interested in doing, really, like bringing back previous versions.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I totally understand where these people are coming from, but I just want them to find something that makes them happy and also gets them to go post somewhere else.
Yeah, don't ruin this for me.
There have been so many posts that are like, are you coming back for the big update next week? Is this going to be the thing that finally gets you back into the game? And there are an overwhelming number of responses that are just like, no, I think this is it. Or like, maybe in a few months I'll give it another try, but I'm playing other games now. I'm just like, okay, great. Can you also go post in those forums instead? And then we'll see who else is left and maybe we can talk about something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. It's a kind of a sad state of affairs. I don't know how to reconcile that, except for like full media blackout. Just sort of enjoy your thing. Don't let somebody else yuck your yum.
Well, I'm trying not to let it get to me, but again, that's one of the only places where people talk about stuff other than like, oh, look at this cool minion I found or whatever. And I can't think of any other games where I really had a similar experience where just everybody just decided they're all going to dogpile on this game after a certain point because I can't take it anymore.
Yeah. You need an IRL friend who appreciates the minutia of Final Fantasy XIV and can engage with you on that level.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Sorry, I'm not that friend. I will, as always, for any of the Final Fantasy updates that do come away, I will nod and make happy noises and ask you follow-up questions anytime you want to talk about it. But my knowledge
yourself. That's
it's pretty shallow, unfortunately. Yeah. Yep. There's a lot of I don't mean to sort of detour this thing, but there's a lot of like looking back happening right now on Animal Crossing because New Horizons came out 5 years ago this week. It was March 20th, 2020.
Was it this week?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was going to say, so today, as we're recording this on the 17th, happy St. Patrick's Day, by the way, is the 5-year anniversary of the lockdown order in Bay Area, California.
Oh, interesting.
So I was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess, Animal Crossing did come out very shortly after that. I didn't realize it was that close, though.
Yeah, within days, yeah. Pennsylvania was a little bit later, but I think I got furloughed like the 22nd or 23rd or something like that from work, so not too far off. But yes, I've seen a little bit of media pop up, and there's certainly like conversations happening in Reddit about people kind of looking back on 5 years of this game, and really the game was only supported for about a year and a half, but it's a huge seller and millions of people got into it, and right time, right place, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, it's not all sort of like universally adoring, and I would not expect it to be. It's not a perfect game by any means.
The retrospectives were not universally adoring.
But really? I've read a few pieces that I'm like, just sort of like, I don't know if I want this in my head. I like my memory of Animal Crossing, and I like sort of the place it was for me in a time when I really needed it. And I don't want people to like undo that somehow. And I'm sort of, I can be subjective, I think, to a certain degree, and I'm open to being kind of analytical about it, and acknowledging its shortcomings. But I also just sort of like, I like the warm fuzzy I have in my head from what was otherwise a pretty shitty time. And I don't know. I want to look forward to the next Animal Crossing game. I want to look back fondly upon this experience that I had with this thing. And I don't know if I need all of this like nitpicking. And wow. I think the internet's especially good at nitpicking.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's why I was saying, like, once you start to feel a certain amount of negativity about something, I feel like that's your immediate, like, that's where your brain goes whenever anything comes out about it.
Yeah.
But I don't remember anybody being super down on New Horizons. Is that, like, unique to these retrospectives?
No, I mean, there was some stuff back in the day about kind of how the inventory system worked or how tedious crafting was, or, things that were different from previous games or things that were missing from previous games. It is certainly not the most full-featured Animal Crossing game.
Is it not?
No.
Are people still complaining that they can't play NES games on their Game Boy Advance or whatever?
Oh, inevitably, yes, of course. But like, things like constellations and the what's the thing? The big telescope. And all of the other stuff.
Like, okay, but
yeah,
I feel like every single Animal Crossing there's been, one or two features that got dropped.
Yeah, that don't make it to the next one.
Yeah, but it's never been it's not been that big of a deal for me.
Nor for me. Again, because those games still exist. You can go back and play them if you want to.
Oh, no, I can't go back to those. I locked down my town forever.
Yeah. Just frozen in time.
Yeah. If I go back, everybody will have moved away and it'll be covered in weeds. It'll be very sad. So I don't want to deal with it.
Right.
But I feel like I was the most negative person I knew about Animal Crossing, because I'm very critical about how the series is just like, I feel like it's very stagnant. Which is not entirely the case with New Horizons. It did much more than I was expecting it to. But I am always just like, I wish it would do more. And even then, I was just like, yeah, it actually turned out to be pretty good. Because if you remember, I was considering not even getting it right before it came out. I was just like, I feel like it's just going to be the same thing again. And it largely was, but I did really enjoy my time with it. Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of like the same thing again as kind of what is the warm, comfortable blanket of the Animal Crossing experience in a lot of ways. But yeah, I don't know. I enjoy it. It's probably my favorite Animal Crossing. It's certainly the one that I spent the most amount of hours playing. But I don't know. Sorry. I'm trying not to sort of get mired in it at this point in the dialogue here. But
when the next one comes out for the Switch 2, that'll be. I think when you take another close look at this and be like, okay, what are they really gonna do this time that makes it a significant jump over the previous one?
Yeah.
Remember when that video came out, like 6 months into the game? Probably not even that long, just like a few months into it, and they were just like, it was this total fan video of like, look at all these features we're adding to the game, and it was all these imaginary quality of life updates and interface improvements.
Yeah.
And all the comments were just like, this looks great. Can't wait until Nintendo never adds a single one of these to the game. And then they never did.
Yeah, they added very little of it. Yep.
So it's that kind of sentiment that I really empathize with. Where I'm just like, yeah, it could be so much better. And then there also were just a lot of very questionable decisions Nintendo made. But
yeah, well, there is sort of like the live nature of that too, where it's after a year you've seen all of the events, and when they come up again in future years, it's kind of the same stuff. It's the same unlocks, it's the same criteria, it's the same visitor in your town, and I think there is like a hunger for that stuff to kind of grow and change and shift over time. Like it should always be, Christmas or holiday or toy season or whatever it is in your town in December, but like do different things. And Nintendo didn't feel that way. Like after a year, they were done.
I feel like there was some sort of expectation that it would be more of like the live service, constantly updating kind of style. But
right.
In reality, it really was just the exact same sort of delivery schedule that they've used for every previous Animal Crossing.
Right.
It was just that they would do stuff in patches rather than have it all in the cart initially.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see if that changes for the next one. Although I think we had a similar discussion about this when the game was more recent, where it's like, would we even want a live service Animal Crossing? And I think we sort of decided like it sort of goes against what Nintendo wants for the game.
Yeah, I could see that. It would make sense to me that. Well, they use Tetris 99 for this, where like the new Kirby game comes out, so it's Kirby weekend in Tetris 99, and you can get Kirby skins and a Kirby theme, and it plays Kirby music while you're playing Tetris. And like, I don't know if I necessarily want that creeping into Animal Crossing. Like, at some point, it's just like, this is just another marketing tool. And that feels a little icky too. But I think I would like there to be sort of, this weekend is the big fishing competition, or some other little game. What was the thing they did for, was it May Day when they put out the limited edition, but like you could only access it briefly, and it was like a separate island you could sail to, and it was a maze.
Oh yeah,
that you had to navigate, like digging up trees and charting a path and getting over obstacles. And there was a character that had not been in the main game that you could sort of like hang out with at the end.
Was that in New Horizons? I completely forgotten about that.
I think it was for May Day. But yes, that was in New Horizons. And and I was like, oh, this is super cool. They should do more things like this, little theme islands that everybody can go to and play and do stuff. And never did it again.
They did do the exact same thing next year.
It was, yes, they did. Okay, I guess they did do it again, but they just put that island up.
That was the only version of it
on May 1st. Yeah,
for that event. Okay,
right.
Yeah. See, like, it would be interesting if they had a completely different sort of holiday/content plan every year. But I also feel like you should just be able to put Animal Crossing into your Switch or Switch 2 and just have the same experience that everybody else is going to have. That seems like sort of the Nintendo route.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm kind of okay with it. I'm glad I don't have to sort of feel obligated to keep playing Animal Crossing 5 years later. I got more time out of it than I did with any of the previous Animal Crossing games, I think. But I just don't know that I could keep up with it at this point. I do get occasionally like this, like, oh, maybe I should go back. Maybe I should like start from scratch, and play the whole thing over again. But then logic prevails. And I know that that's a stupid thing to say. And I would never go at it with the enthusiasm that I would before, or I don't have the time to go at it with the enthusiasm I had before.
Yeah. You actually have to go to your job and all that stuff.
Right. Exactly. So yeah. I don't know. I said I wasn't going to get negative about Animal Crossing, and maybe I did, but
I still just can't imagine how people end up super negative about it. I'll have to go read one of these articles you're talking about.
Yeah. So yeah, happy 5-year anniversary of Animal Crossing.
Yeah. Wonder when the next one's coming out.
Switch 2 launch game. You heard it here first.
No, it took like 3 years to get it on the Switch 1, right? So
yeah, it took exactly 3 years. Yep. It'll be a bit,
maybe year 2, but that seems like, I don't know. I feel like they really want to give it enough time in the oven.
I mean, they're still selling copies of New Horizons. Why would you rush to the next one?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe a Switch 3 launch game.
No.
Sometime in 2035 with the 10th anniversary coronavirus, or what am I trying to say? This 10th generation coronavirus is back. All locked down again in our space pods.
COVID 35.
Yeah.
So, video games. We played some. I played a couple. Yeah. Monday, March 24th, we will be streaming a game at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. At this point, we don't quite know what that game will be.
Ooh.
Unless you know, and I don't, TJ. Do you know?
Oh, should I tell him what it is? Nah, no, I'll make it a surprise.
You're making it sound like it's meant to be some like big surprise. Is it a big surprise?
Well, now I was just doing a bit, but now I'm like, what if I should just pick something weird? We'll play it. No, we actually don't. We haven't picked out a game yet. We have a short list that we're narrowing down, but it's not narrowed quite enough yet.
If anybody has any ideas, you can jump into our Discord and let us know what that idea is.
Yeah, we could stream something that the community selects.
Yeah,
but yeah. We'll be streaming something on Monday the 24th at 10 o'clock.
Correct. You can go to twitch.tv/VGHangover at 10 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday night and find out what that thing is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last week, what did we play? We played the demo for Wanderstop.
Yes.
And since then, the game has come out in full. And you and I got to put a few hours into I was going to call it the main game, but it is just the game.
Yes.
As opposed to the demo. Since then. So a brief overview for anybody who was not keeping up. Wanderstop is it's a cozy game. You run a tea shop.
Kind of.
Yeah. Well, explain that, DJ.
The premise
kind of
on the box.
Way? Yeah.
On the box, or the metaphorical box, is it's a game where you run a tea shop and you serve tea to customers based on their preferences. Right. Is how it was presented to me in like several times. But so more background. One of the key designers in this game is Davey Wreden, who also created the Stanley Parable and the Beginner's Guide, which, I mean, the Stanley Parable is just all over the place. It's very, I don't even know how you would describe that game. It's very self-aware and really plays with your expectations. And then the Beginner's Guide started as one thing. I was sort of like giving myself a refresher on this because it actually came up a lot as we were streaming Wanderstop last week. So it starts off as this, what is purportedly a look into this sort of like back catalog of an unknown game developer and some of his earlier works. And then it turns out that it's like, you think this is a real guy that Davey Wreden has unearthed, and you're getting to explore some of his unfinished games. And then it kind of turns out that he's just been like using it as sort of the whole thing is an analog for his own struggles with game development. And it's a huge twist. So I just gave it away. But that ended up being like one of my favorite games of all time. It was just like, I'd never seen another game sort of do that. And it was also just a really amazing sort of use of like video games as sort of a storytelling medium.
Right.
But because of that history, I'm just like, you load up the trailer for Wanderstop, and it's like this very colorful sort of, it looks like every other cozy game out there where you're running a cafe or whatever you do. You're gardening. You're growing plants and making tea and all that stuff. So I saw this and I'm just like, okay, so where's the big like Davey Wreden twist? Is it going to become, and I said jokingly, it's all going to be just about, the tea shop is another analog for how like tormented he is at being a game developer. And then it kind of turns out that that's exactly what it is. So, I mean, I hope that's not a spoiler, but I'm just like, I think like most people saw this coming. I was looking at the launch trailer for this, and a lot of people had very similar reactions where they're just like, okay, so where's the big Stanley Parable twist? Like, when is that happening? Because this looks like, it genuinely does look like you're just working in a tea shop. And it seems unlikely that is the case.
Yes. Yeah. So you, I think you nailed it. It's definitely, it has sort of like the visuals and the structure of what would be like a farming sim kind of game, or like a Stardew Valley kind of experience where You get to know the villagers, and you do a little farming, and you collect resources, and you make a little money, and things like that. And, upgrade, yada, yada. And Wanderstop sort of appears to be that kind of game. And it does have some of that structure to it. You're kind of growing stuff, and you're finding seeds to do cross-pollination hybrids to get fruit, to make different types of tea. And the whole tea making process is a giant machine that requires a lot of interaction and mechanisms and things like that. So there's a ritual to all of this, which is sort of very on brand for tea in the first place. And yeah, so it does sort of like push the buttons and does seem to be sort of come in the wrapper of what I think people expect from a cozy game or a farming sim kind of game, a social sim kind of game. But this is much more character driven than I think a lot of those games are from my experience. And this is much more, I don't know if linear is the right word, but it's definitely more sort of like narrative driven than those games seem to be. It has like very specific story beats. And they come pretty efficiently. I feel like it's not a lot of like downtime between things. So I think it definitely has it has sort of a brisker pace to it than some of those, farming games that sort of feel like they just play out over a very long period of time.
It's kind of funny because the whole time playing it, I get the impression that the game will never like rush you to do anything. Like, you can take your time and there's a whole bunch of like chores you can do around the tea shop, and you could just sort of explore around the grounds. There's like a whole like forest setting where you go and find more tea plants and other stuff. But it's never like, oh, you need to really urgently attend to this customer or they're gonna like get upset and you'll lose their business or whatever. But on the flip side, as soon as there is like a new thing for you to do, the customer will just come right over to you. In fact, I've been like kind of put off on a few times because I've been like doing something and then they'll just like pop up off the side of the screen and I was like, where did you come from?
Oh, really?
You walked all the way across the map to find me and let me know that, there's a glowing exclamation point over your head now and I should talk to you, which is kind of hilarious.
I have found that I've only had a few customers so far that if the first one, I wasn't ready at all. Like I had not really done any of the exploration. I wanted to like play with some of the tools a little bit and it's a pretty big, like you have your little tea shop, but there's a big like compound around it. Essentially, it's not an open world game or anything like that, but it's like one big location that you have access to. And I kind of wanted to explore that and kind of poke around in the corners a little bit. The tea leaves kind of grow wild, so you do have to explore to find the bushes that they grow on, and forage those. So yeah, I wanted to kind of poke around a little bit, and like immediately, like first day, there was somebody who was like, "I need a cup of tea," and he had very specific conditions. I need something with a little caffeine in it. His great character was very kind of eccentric and fun, and you can choose to sort of interact with him very briefly. But in your sort of dialogue choices, there is always something that's like a tell me more, or show me one more picture of your kid, or some other little like thing to keep the conversation going. And I think it's really fun that if you want to be efficient and you want to role play a character that's just like all business, and that's kind of on sort of right for the character that you're playing, I think, in a lot of ways. But if you're enjoying your kind of meandering dialogue with one of these tea shop patrons, there are tools to being able to kind of interact with them a little bit more, which is fun. But I found that I wasn't ready. So he gave me his tea order and I was like, do I have to like do this right away or he gets angry and leaves? And to your point, that's not really that's not this game.
They just go sit down forever.
He did. He just went and sat down in the shop, and I had to go find him later. He didn't like follow me around asking for tea every 10 minutes. So the game is very content to let you kind of move at its own pace. In fact, there's something sort of written into the dialogue options early on, and I'm not sure if this was your experience as well, where somebody doesn't want a cup of tea. And the main character, the character you're playing as, I forget her name. Do you remember her name?
Alta.
I was like, no, this is a tea shop. You have to get a cup of tea. Why are you just hanging out here? And the tea shop owner, Boro, was like, no, that's not how this works. if they want tea, they get tea. If they don't want tea, they don't have to have tea. And Alta's very absolute about it. No, it's a tea shop. You have to have tea. But it never feels like the patrons have that sense of urgency at all. Which I kind of like, because somebody could say, I want a cup of tea that is, highly caffeinated or has this kind of fruit infusion. And then you can go play around for 45 minutes to an hour and like stumble upon the solution that makes that cup of tea or not, your choice. And you don't lose anything. You don't get downgraded. The patron doesn't leave eventually. And you have to wait, 3 weeks for them to come back to your tea shop. So it does feel like there's a lot of like quality of life kind of efficiencies built into this thing where you can kind of consume it at your own pace. Conversely, though, it does feel like it's very much trying to tell a story and is trying to kind of usher you through those beats as you're ready for them. So I do like that it kind of has a point and doesn't feel aimless.
It's interesting that it gives you so many sort of like little activities you can do around the tea shop, and it's like it really feels like it's leaning into you sort of just being the manager of the place and sort of like customizing it, and like you can place decorations all over the place and plant flowers and all this other stuff.
You can take pictures and put them on the wall.
Yeah, but at no point am I ever just like, oh, I really want to just sit down and like do that for the next hour. So it's not like terraforming your island in Animal Crossing or anything.
Yes. The way that sort of crept in for me is you get a pair of shears so that as weeds grow around the shop, you can trim them back.
Yeah.
And you get a broom.
The weeds are disgusting in this.
Yeah, they're really...
Oh my God. Every time I see one, I'm just like, Jesus, what? Like, and I have to like immediately go cut it down because they're horrible.
They make you want to cut them down. Yeah. And the leaf piles, you can sweep up leaf piles that sort of will accumulate around the, I keep wanting to say island, that will accumulate around the tea store. And sometimes you'll find little treasures, little trinkets at the bottom that are like decorations or things that sort of like have little stories connected to them. I found a cool little coffee mug that that was a different shape and different style than the other ones, and I went and I put it on the shelf. In the tea, I washed it first, of course, because it was at the bottom of a tea pile, and then, a leaf pile. But then I put it on a shelf with the rest of my coffee mugs, and that's kind of fun. But like in my brain, I'm like, well, I have to trim the weeds, I have to sweep up the leaves, because I'll get a bad rating, or I'll fail something, or my boss will speak to me harshly, and that's not this game. Like, I suspect you don't have to do any of those things if you don't want to. You could just let leaf piles and weeds run rampant around your tea stop and nobody would call you out for it.
Yeah. Probably not.
Yeah. So I kind of like that.
Just the sort of like hands off, let you do whatever approach.
Yes. Yeah. And not having to sort of like create a spreadsheet to figure out like optimal amounts of like, when do I do this and on what day do it's not Persona where
it's like it's not the stressful sort of like shop manager that it could have potentially been.
Correct. And there's no currency in it that I'm aware of, so that you're not really trying to like get money or pay for upgrades or level up your character or anything like that. It is also not that game. So it's I don't know, it's a little surprising and kind of delightful about how like leisurely the whole thing is, and how sort of stress-free the experience is, despite me wanting to make it in my brain that kind of game.
It's been difficult for me to like classify, because first of all, it's definitely not about making tea, at least not in the way that I was expecting. Like, if anything, it's more about gardening, but it's really not even about that. Like, you do most of the gardening in service to the customers, because you need to find whatever specific tea ingredients they need. Right. But maybe this is just me. I've never felt the need to like garden just for the sake of having plants around, or just having it, or like not even having a tea stockpile, because it's actually difficult to do that because you have a very limited amount of inventory space. So I've found myself being very sort of like practical in terms of what I do garden.
Yes.
Which is a little weird. It's like, I was expecting it to definitely be more on the cozy side of things, despite also expecting the big twist at some point. But it feels much more like it's trying to sort of funnel you through the story, as opposed to letting you just like kick back and do some gardening until you're ready to continue the storyline.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. So it's
like you're definitely like they're expecting people to be here for the story component,
and not because like I love every cozy farming game ever, and this is the next one that I'm playing.
Yeah, because like if that was all you're looking for in this, I don't think it's a very like it doesn't really satisfy that for at least not for me.
I would agree. Yeah, I think the most sort of like mechanically kind of ornate process in the game is creating those hybrids, and it's not hard. And to your point, resources are plentiful. I did have a moment where it was like, oh, you're out of storage space. You can't put that in your pocket. And I had to like Google, how do I get more storage space in Wanderstop?
How do I upgrade my pockets?
Right, exactly. Can I buy a backpack somewhere? And it's not that game. That's not what this is here for. So, I have to like shake off the baggage of all of the other like cozy games I've ever played, where you just get wrapped up in all the mechanisms and all of the if this then that kind of moments. Wanderstop is trying to tell a story, and you kind of go with it. The story is a little has a little heaviness to it. You're a fallen fighter, and you've been training really hardcore for a very long time, but you've had a series of setbacks and failures, and you're just kind of in a weird mental place. And you stumble upon this tea shop. This is in the demo for anybody who's interested in checking that out, or didn't watch our stream the other night. The tea shop is a place where you're basically kind of, stuck in the interim and just trying to keep yourself busy with something that's sort of easy and positive, and sort out your kind of personal demons, which is not the standard storyline for a game where
for a cozy game.
Where you're doing a lot of farming and romancing of the locals. So I think that's kind of where the heaviness comes in, and that's probably the most surprising element of this. I don't know. It's interesting. There's a lot of kind of surprising things going on here, and that feels like the very Davey Wreden approach to this. Yeah,
I feel like I don't know if I was surprised by it as much as I was just like, oh yes, it's about this again. I felt it was very, very thinly veiled. As soon as it starts out, the character's explaining their career as a fighter and how now they're experiencing all these setbacks. So it's just like, oh, I see. This is just him. He's just doing this again.
Yes.
Yep. Which I was like, oh, okay. It feels like it's a bit retreading what some of the themes from the beginner's guide.
Oh, interesting.
Which is weird. I don't know if I'm super into that aspect of it. I also just don't think the main character is likable whatsoever. It's just they're actually very obnoxious.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is an interesting decision.
But Boro's great. I like Boro. I enjoy talking to him every time. I like that he gets super excited about tea and does his little clap when he's ready to move on to the next thing. He's your boss at the tea shop, I guess, in a lot of ways. He's the owner.
He's the owner, yeah.
Yeah. And I do find him to be kind of a breath of fresh air character, where Alta, just everything feels heavy and hard. And it should for what she's kind of going through, I guess. But yeah, she's not really fun to be around, and you're constantly stuck with her. Yeah,
so that's kind of a drag. I don't know, I'm just like, the characters are not hooking me like I was expecting. Although, like, some of the customers who have come in, I've kind of enjoyed. But for the most part, I'm just like, I can't wait till the point where she, like, regains her confidence or whatever, because that's what it feels like it's building towards.
Yeah. What's it? I'm into it. I think it's beautiful. I didn't talk about that. It's absolutely gorgeous. The whole like shop itself, the environment, the the trees and the woods and the forest and the stuff around it, bright neon colors and kind of beautifully set designed and pretty easy to get around. But it has a couple little secrets kind of tucked here and there, and the promise of things that will come in the future are sort of like built into the design of the the shop. So like you see all these empty picture frames, and you know that you have an objective ultimately to put pictures of them and things like that. Empty shelves where, you know, trophies and collectibles and trinkets and stuff will go. So that's kind of fun and kind of built into the way that the whole thing is arranged. But yeah, super pretty, and the music is really nice. I think it does some really cool things. You get advice early on to enjoy a cup of tea yourself and just find a place to sit and enjoy it. And there's tons of places all over the shop, inside and out, to sit down and enjoy a moment. And the game does what other games do, where the camera kind of pulls back and the music swells, and you get kind of this like kind of moment. But they're really pretty in Wanderstop, and they feel kind of, you know, well earned when you get to them. It's really nice.
I'm just waiting for there to be like another big twist. Because I imagine that they're like, I feel like there has to be more going on, but it's really affected by the way I'm just like interpreting everything that happens. Because anytime I run into any sort of like friction in the game or something that I don't care for, I'm just like, is this also part of the metaphor? Like the guy, you run into this guy who's like I don't know, he seems like, well, I'm just trying to like view everything through the lens of like, this is something that happened to Davey Wreden as he has been working as a game developer. And there's this one character who is basically the super fan who idolizes Alta in this case. And I'm just like, okay, so this feels very one-to-one with like something he must have actually experienced. But then there's other things, like the system for brewing the tea itself feels like needlessly over mechanical. Like there's so many different steps to it, and none of them I think are super enjoyable. But I'm just like, is this like, what is this about? Is this like, is he just that much into the process of brewing tea, or is this like part of the struggle of being a game developer? I don't know. I'm just like, I'm just reading way too far into everything.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe you just need to like stop trying to look for metaphors.
But I feel like the game is like just beating you over the head with like, oh yeah, this is just everything is symbolic of something else going on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it was just like some random game you picked up off of Steam and you had no idea who made it or wrote it, I don't know that clearly you would not be in a place where you're trying to thread those things together. Or maybe you could view it more self-autobiographical is redundant, but maybe see it a little more autobiographical, where you would sort of like, oh, I've had, you know, setbacks. I identify with Alta in this way, that I work hard at things, and when I don't get, you know, what I feel like I'm working towards, I get despondent and withdrawn and locked in too. So I don't know, maybe it would be easier to not know that it was made by a reluctant video game developer who has a lot of demons to work out on his own.
Yeah, well, I think that was sort of the mindset I went into with the beginner's guide, and now having played that, I'm just like, oh,
so looking for it.
I wonder if it's just that thing happening again, and it kind of is.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying I feel like there should be like a second twist later on that is just like so brilliant and lives up to something like the beginner's guide, but it feels like this is very similar to the beginner, or it's a very similar sort of like message as the beginner's guide, but in sort of maybe a more digestible package.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
We shall see.
I'm continuing to work my way through it.
Yeah. Same. Yeah, I was very excited about this because it was Davey Wreden. Again, I don't know that it would necessarily be on my radar if he was not connected to making it. So I'm happy to have a reason to want to play it, but yeah, I'm curious to see sort of if it delivers on kind of all of the world building and story it's trying to tell right now.
Yeah.
So that is Wanderstop. More on that later. I'm going to stick with it. It sounds like DJ is too.
Yeah, I think I have no idea how long it is, but I'm a fair ways into it at this point.
120 hours.
Oh my god. I can't even, like, these days, like, yeah, why wouldn't a game be 120 hours long?
That's before you even get to the DLC.
Oh my god. Just think of all the new what not flavors. What do you call different types of tea? Not like strains. It sounds like a disease.
No, that's cannabis.
Varietals.
Varietals, yeah.
I don't know.
Cultivars,
yeah. That sounds more likely.
About 10 hours, according to the internet. So.
Okay, yeah, that seems more reasonable.
Yeah. I'll throw out, too, for anybody who maybe has not played the beginner's guide. It is only about 90 minutes, 2 hours. It's super short and pretty easy to digest. So if that appeals to you at all, it's on Steam. Check it out.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely worth a look.
And the Stanley Parable is a game I adore. And there was like a definitive edition of it that came out last year that had a bunch of new content and stuff. Was that last year? 2 years ago? Recently.
It was a couple years ago.
And that's out there. That's on Switch and stuff too. So that's available for just about everything. That is a fun game to play around with.
Yeah.
What else? DJ, what have you talk to us about Monster Hunter Wilds?
I am so tired of the Monster Hunter community on Reddit.
Oh no.
Can't deal with it everywhere I look. No, I've been playing a lot of Monster Hunter Wilds lately and just reflecting on my history with this series. The series is so different than when I started playing back on the PSP in like 2009 to 2010 maybe. It's wild to think that when I first got into this, I was looking for a game that I could just like live in. Basically, this is Final Fantasy XIV. Wasn't out at this point, so I didn't have a lot of good options. I think I was playing Star Trek Online as well, but I was just like, this looks like sort of an offline MMO with like a really deep world and a lot to learn about it. It feels very mysterious. And after several attempts, it finally clicked for me, and I've spent like hundreds of hours playing it since then. And at that time, it was just like this weird little obscure PSP game outside of Japan anyway, that was famous for being like not very inviting and kind of obtuse. And I think that might have also been part of the appeal. There just seemed like there was so much to learn about it.
Yeah. And
now, fast forward 15 years, and Monster Hunter Wilds comes out, and it is, I think I saw a headline about it, it's the highest grossing video game to come out since the last Call of Duty. So it's like, okay.
What?
So just the most popular video game in the world suddenly. How did this happen? It's just wild to think about. And yeah, so I've just been doing a lot of reflecting, because I have also, like, back then the Monster Hunter community was very tiny. I don't even know if there was a subreddit at that point. I mean, there must have been. There was like a subreddit for everything. But as the community has just like exploded over the last maybe 5 or 6 years since Monster Hunter World came out, I have felt that it's just turned into one of those other video game communities, which is like, like reposting trailers every day and trying to, find the latest leaks and stuff like that. And it's just like exhausting to me. And I found myself not really following sort of the pre-release hype cycle for this. Like, I knew it was coming out. I knew there was a new Monster Hunter game coming out. And everybody seemed very excited about it. But I just couldn't deal with it, because it at some point, I think it was like with World, because that was like the big game that finally just exploded in the West outside of Japan. It turned into one of those communities where it's just everybody, or for some reason it was suddenly about just like min-maxing everything. And you would go on the subreddit and you'd be like, okay, so what are the best builds? What are the 10 things that you need to know before you play Monster Hunter Wilds, and that sort of thing, where everything is just so like exhaustively categorized. And like everything is just known about the game at this point, which is, there's also something that the game has been, or the developers have been doing. They've been making a lot of changes to the series especially since World, to make things more player-friendly. For better or for worse, because I think like there are a lot of things about the earlier Monster Hunter games that were like not only not player-friendly, but also just sort of peculiar in how they work. Like famously in the earlier games, if you wanted to use a healing item in the middle of a fight against one of these big monsters, you'd have to put your weapon away and you'd like start drinking a potion, and your character would just like plant in place as they did this whole potion drinking animation. And during that whole animation, you were just vulnerable to whatever the monster was doing. So you really had to be conscious about when you decided to heal. But I think like that was another thing that appealed to me about Monster Hunter in a weird way, is that early on it was very much like you had to be just like completely dialed in the whole time. Like you couldn't just go in and mash buttons sort of carelessly, because that would be put you in a bad situation. And that was a lot of I think that spirit sort of carried through the rest of the game, where you just had to be very aware and sort of informed about what was going on, whether it was what you were doing moment to moment in fights, and you had to actually have some knowledge of the monster's attacks and sort of like other characteristics that you could use to your advantage, like stuff that you could forage in the environment, or different like potions or medicines you could bring to counteract the different monsters' attributes and things like that. So there was just a lot to sort of learn about the game, which I really appreciated. And since then, in the more recent games, they have dialed a little bit of that back. Like, you no longer just freeze in place if you're drinking a healing item. They've added a bunch of other just sort of quality of life improvements that make the experience overall easier, or just more welcoming to people who don't want to really like cut their teeth on this very difficult game. But I feel like it's also gotten to the point where they have just about finished sanding off all the rough edges of the game. And I think a lot of the community is also starting to realize this about Wilds, which is the latest one, where there is a lot of stuff that you just don't have to think about anymore. For instance, the whole potion thing, the healing thing, you used to have a whole backpack full of potions, and once you figured out the most opportune time to drink one of these, where you know the monster is not going to smack you, you go in and figure out like what like potency potion you would want to drink, because that's just another layer of like strategy that goes into it. But now you just like select something from your weapon wheel or your ability wheel or whatever. That is, it just makes you drink the most optimal potion for whatever your health is at that point.
Oh no.
And there's another one that's just like optimal recovery or a status recovery item, which just selects the thing. Like if you've been poisoned or paralyzed or whatever, you just select this item from the menu and it'll go into your inventory and pick out the status recovery item that corresponds with whatever status affliction you've got. And to me, that's like, oh, it's very convenient, because now I just push a button and everything is fixed. But it also just strips away another thing that you previously had to think about. And I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I could see that. Sure. I mean, it's this is knowledge that you've gleaned over years of Animal Crossing, of Monster Hunter games, and now there's a button that just sort of makes it all go away, and it just does the right thing, and that's a little weird.
Yeah, it's like you could argue that you're only bringing the appropriate recovery items anyway, so why would you end up using the wrong one by mistake? But it's just weird how streamlined it is at this point. The other thing that really surprised me about this version is that there's a whole new system. This is actually brand new in Wilds, called it's basically like monster wounds. I'm going to call it weak points, because if you call it wounds, it gets really disgusting. But basically, as you're fighting these big monsters, these like glowing red spots will light up, and that indicates that the monster has a new weak point, and you can use this new sort of like focus mode, they call it, to specifically target that point on the monster. And if you hit it, they will like be sort of staggered, and you can get a few extra hits in while it's trying to recover. And it's an interesting system. The thing that sort of blew my mind about it, though, is that when you're using focus mode, your hunter sort of just like points to wherever you are pointing the camera. So you enable focus mode, you just like hold down the L2 trigger. And then as you turn the camera, your hunter just like redirects themselves to wherever you're facing, which is so different than every Monster Hunter game previous to this. Because what would happen previously, and this sort of goes along the lines of just like you having to be really dialed in to play these games. When you would do an attack in the previous games, typically, depending on which weapon you're using, you would get locked into like the animation of your character doing this attack. And just for the purposes of this, I'll talk about this as if you're using the Great Sword, which is like sort of the flagship weapon of Monster Hunter. It's like this gigantic sword, which is extremely slow, has these very long sort of wind-up animations. But the thing is, or the key to using this weapon is, you really have to time out your attacks. Because as you're doing this big wind-up, the monster could be like jumping all over the place. So you have to sort of anticipate where the monster is going to be 1 or 2 seconds from now as you're completing the swing. Because once you start doing this attack, you're sort of locked in place and just hoping that the monster is where you want it to be when the attack lands. And it was kind of amazing. Like, this is not my weapon of choice playing Monster Hunter because it's quite difficult to use. But I've had some stints using the Great Sword, and it's so satisfying when you do this big charge up and get it to connect successfully. In fact, there was this one period where I was just probably the most into the Great Sword that I've ever been, where I think I figured out like you could stand in front of the monster and face the opposite direction and start charging up your attack, and like most of the time the monster would sort of like loop around and it like plant itself right in front of you, so your sword just hit in the face. And that was so satisfying to figure out. But back to Monster Hunter Wilds, you can be using like the Great Sword or whatever weapon, you turn on focus mode, and as you're charging up your attack, you're like your hunter is just pivoting in place, so the attack always hits where you're aiming it.
Oh.
And I'm just like, oh, so that whole sort of like layer of expertise in really understanding how your weapon works and anticipating the monster's movements and everything, that's just gone now, because you can focus mode just auto-target practically every attack, so it always connects. And it's a whole other skill to, I mean, it's not fully autopilot. You still have to be sort of steering yourself so your weapon hits these weak points. But that seems so contradictory to just how every Monster Hunter game has played up to this point. And I'm not sure how I feel about that either. Like, at the same time, having fun, like, it's interesting that there's this whole, like, weak point targeting system. And yes, it does make the game much more comfortable to play. But on so many of these hunts now, I go out there and I just sort of, like, I hold down L2 and I just sort of mash the buttons, knowing that every single one of my attacks is now going to hit the monster. I have to think so much less about positioning and, maneuvering around and hoping the monster is still there. When my attack finally goes off, it's very, very weird.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like they've given up quite a bit of the intricacy and planning from the previous games to make it way more kind of approachable or accessible.
Yeah, and that's definitely true. And I think, like, I'm sort of questioning some of the decisions that they made. I'm also, like, I'm definitely on board with a lot of the other stuff that they've done, because I think, like, yeah, the potion thing was always felt a little archaic. And they also sort of balanced around it where, like, yeah, you could be running around and drinking a potion, but if there's an emergency and you have to, like, roll out of the way, you just don't get the full healing off that you would normally get if you had just been able to stand there and drink your potion in peace.
Oh, gotcha. Right.
But at the same time, I'm just like, it's so different than the Monster Hunter games that, I was introduced to the series through. The weird thing is, like, I'm still enjoying it. It still
I was going to say, I can't tell from all of this if you were having fun with it.
It's just a very different experience, because in the older games, I would get so into planning these hunts, and there was such a feeling of satisfaction triumphing over the monster because you would, like, it depended a lot more on your knowledge and understanding and just like your expertise as a hunter to overcome these bosses. And now it kind of feels like you're just going out there and mowing them down to get like new equipment to fight the next more difficult monster. And I don't know, maybe that's what people want. Maybe people just want just chained gratification as they go from one boss to the next. But it feels like it is kind of a very different game.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard you, and similar to my experience with Final Fantasy games, I've heard you kind of talk about the evolution of this for the last many years. And what was the one previously? Monster Hunter World?
There was World, and then there was Rise, which continued sort of the it maintained a lot of the quality of life improvements they've made from World.
But I think World was kind of the first one that was big, was like multi-platform at first, and had the kind of service game, limited time events and things like that structure to it.
Yeah, they really tried hard to make it a live service thing, which I think is like they kind of stepped away from that a little bit with Rise, which I in retrospect I greatly preferred. Just even after a few hours of Rise, I was just like, oh, I like this format much more than what was going on in World. But now they're just fully back into the World model, trying to make this a live service thing again, which I think is not like they're not really doing a great job of it. It's very weird. Like immediately, one of the things that I really did not like about World is that they had these limited time events, which I didn't understand because it's not like anybody is paying Capcom a subscription to play Monster Hunter World or Monster Hunter Rise.
There's no season pass.
There's no season pass. There's not really I don't know, like a monetary incentive to keep people playing this game constantly, and yet there would be these events that pop up for just a couple weeks at a time. In fact, the day this came out, there was already a limited time event that went away after a week. So that's even if you're just a little bit late to playing this game, there's already something in the game that you can't do anymore until it comes back like a year from now or whenever. I don't know what the schedule is going to be. But that really bothered me. And it seems like that's just going to be the same sort of deal with Wilds again, which I'm I wish they had sort of learned something from World, or at least, if they're going to make it a full live service thing, just I don't know what really the advantages of a live service model are. I mean, they do regular content updates, but I feel like that's just so many games at this point.
Yeah. Well, people like live service games, and they sell 1 billion copies, and World probably sold 1 billion copies, so I think there's a lot of incentive there to just replicate that. Yeah.
Yeah, but for some reason they were fine with in Monster Hunter Rise, reverting to the old format for events where they would release an event and it was just there forever. You could do it anytime you wanted. Maybe there'll be more of a balance in Wilds. But the game's only been out for a few weeks, so not fully sure how it will shape up. It does feel like it's going to be more of the World's format, where it's just these endlessly cycling events.
I was going to say, it's fairly new, but you do kind of have to get people from day one, right?
Yeah, do you?
Well, I mean, there is an incentive to keep them coming back, right?
Yeah, well, so that's the thing is I don't know if there is, because once they buy the game, then, Capcom has their money. It's not like they're putting out tons of DLC to get people to keep opening their wallets.
Okay, and there's no season pass, like you said, so.
No, I think they did have a pretty robust sort of DLC offering in both World and Rise, so I'm sure that'll happen again.
There's got to be a roadmap, right?
In fact, I think there's already they're doing, it's not a season pass, but what do they call these? Maybe it is a season pass. It's not a battle pass, is well, that's what I was confusing it with. They've already got a season pass full of just like cosmetic items, which I saw, and I love my cosmetic items, but I wasn't willing to buy into this thing because they haven't even said what's going to be in it. It's one of those where it's just like, yeah, you get this, and then when it comes out, you will receive the items. But like for the most part, it does feel like a Monster Hunter game again. It's very comfortable, which is a good thing. Everybody likes to be comfortable, but I think sort of the most memorable moments of the earlier Monster Hunter games was stuff that I really like struggled to overcome. But that just made it so much more exciting when I finally understood how some component of the game worked, or I beat my head against the wall against a specific boss for weeks before I was finally able to take it down. And this one, I think I have not actually failed a quest so far, which is, I've played a lot of Monster Hunter at this point, so I feel like I'm pretty good at it, but just didn't expect to be undefeated all the way to the end of the game. That was kind of a shock to me.
Yeah. Are you playing on easy mode?
No, come on. I don't think there is an easy mode.
No, it's not a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you're leveling up weapons and you're hunting monsters, right?
Here's the thing. I didn't level up. I almost did not level up my armor for the entire game. I maybe built one new armor set, which used to be just every new quest in the previous Monster Hunter. I'd be like, I gotta get some new armor for this, so it's going to end badly.
Yeah.
And this one is like, I haven't upgraded my armor in a while, but also I really haven't, hasn't occurred to me that it might be an issue based on how these last few hunts have gone, so that's also weird.
Yeah, you're not really struggling.
Yeah, and this is another thing that the community has picked up on. A lot of sentiment has been like, oh, it's so much easier than the previous ones. And I think the messaging from Capcom is like they have more difficult monsters planned with the next few sort of like patches.
Ah.
But yeah, kind of a weird introduction out of the gate with Monster Hunter Wilds. It's just sort of a very, very stress-free experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird that you would complain that there's not enough stress, but I get it.
It's, yeah, because on some level, like, I feel like I don't want to be stressed out playing a game. There are a few monsters. The stuff they introduced very late in World's lifespan that I feel like is probably the most stressed out I've ever been playing a Monster Hunter game. In fact, I think back to those and I'm just like, I don't know if I would do that again. So, to some degree, I also feel like I just earned a reprieve from fighting super difficult monsters. Maybe that urge will come back once they release monsters later down the road. But, no, I expect, I don't know what I expect from Monster at this point.
All right. Well, are you done with it?
Am I done with it?
Yeah.
I'm still playing it.
I mean, there's a campaign, I assume, right? If you finish that, is it?
There's like, I've seen credits roll. There's stuff that happens after the credits. So there's like more monsters that pop up. Which, since I wasn't following the pre-release hype, it has been very exciting because there have been some old sort of like fan favorite monsters that have popped up again.
Cool.
So that's been cool. I'm hoping that there's just like, I don't know. I want more reasons to like build more armor or like upgrade my weapons or anything. Maybe this is the point where I finally try a different weapon. Maybe I'll go back to the greatsword for a bit. But it feels very sort of like very familiar for whatever reason.
Yeah. I mean, it's a weird place to be as a developer, right? You want to give people a reason to buy the new one. And if you've like built a skill set around the previous game and you're up for the next challenge, then it's a bummer to kind of have to start back at zero. But you got to get new people to play your game too. So you've got to get them to start at a place that feels comfortable. So I don't know how you find both of those places.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the concerns is that, like, I don't know, if they're really catering more towards people who are new to the series,
right?
Like, how much simpler do they have to make it? Or how much more inviting to make it. Like, I didn't even touch on how there's this whole single-player campaign, which is by far the most effort they put into sort of a single-player storyline in one of these games. But it has just had, like catastrophic effects on people trying to play multiplayer through the campaign with their friends because there are just so many new hoops they have to jump through. So that's a whole other issue that I won't get into right now. It's a pretty solid game overall, but there are definitely some things they're still sort of struggling with, whether it's how much campaign the game truly needs or how to really do live service correctly.
Mm.
But I will inevitably keep checking in with it over the next few weeks, at least, because there's still more monsters out there.
Cool. All right. Well, we are at the kind of arbitrarily determined time that we wrap this up. I will have to get to Death of the Reprobate next week. 2 weeks.
Oh, no.
Save it for a future episode.
You just do that on the stream. You could just tell people what you thought about Death of the Reprobate.
Maybe we could do that.
Randy's soapbox.
Yep. You know, I love a soapbox.
Oh, do you? Okay. Well, I didn't want to open that door.
Yeah. You didn't want to open that soapbox. We had a soapbox thing in the past, and wasn't there a former iteration of this show where it wasn't like Paul had a soapbox?
Paul's soapbox?
Yeah, was that a thing?
I think Paul had a milk crate.
Oh, I remember the milk crate. Maybe
I don't know if we ever had a soapbox segment.
I'm confusing my boxes and crates.
Confusing your improvised, I don't know,
elevation devices.
Speaking platforms.
Right. Yeah. If you need any more video game hangover in your brain, you should follow us on Blue Sky. Just search for VGHangover.com. You can always get show notes and links and tell us what you thought about this episode at VGHangover.com. We'd love for you to join us on Discord. You can get a link to that at, hold on to your hats, VGHangover.com.
Yeah.
Please subscribe, rate, and review us on your podcasting app of choice. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, all of those things. And maybe hook us up with a referral to one of your friends. If they're like, what's a good podcast I should listen to? Tell them about Video Game Hangover.
Yeah. Helps us get the word out of the show, bringing new listeners. We really appreciate if you can do that.
Yeah.
Speaking of people we really appreciate, we want to give thanks again to RJ Lake for our intro and outro music this week. If you'd like to hear more of his work, you can go to spellmynamewithabang.bandcamp.com and get his whole catalog. It's not Bandcamp Friday this week, but you should do it anyway.
It's a nice thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll be back on Monday the 24th at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, streaming a to-be-determined game. Make sure you go to twitch.tv/VGHangover to hang out with us while we play something.
Something.
Yep. And then we'll be back in your ears on Thursday, April 3rd with yet another new episode.
Oh, wow. We're getting way into the future now.
Into the magical crystal ball. Ooh. April's a whole other world.
I know, it seems so distant.
But we'll be back soon. Until then, this is Randy Dickinson.
This is DJ Ross.
Thanks for listening to Video Game Hangover. Goodbye.
Good night.
See ya.